Today, we celebrate a guy who has finally written his name into the Hall of Heroes. Not quite like that, unless that is how you enjoy our videos. A man who has been on the brink of true greatness too many times. A man who has been at times the best rifler in the world, whose deagle is feared the world over, but who has gone too long without the trophy to prove it. Today, we celebrate NiKo. The story begins before CSGO even existed. NiKo was kicking around in Serbian and Bosnian teams from around 2009, but it wasn't until CSGO came out that he became recognised. His stint on iNation was interrupted several times by short periods on other teams, but he kept coming back to iNation, until one day he got the call from mousesports. Spiddy, Nex and Dennis came in not long after, and Mouse seemed to have no room for their new Bosnian superstar. He would not stay ignored for long, however, by mousesports or the wider CSGO community. He took to Pro League with what was realistically a middling team, and eviscerated Titan. We know you've seen this ace before, but this is NiKo's video and we're gonna watch it again.
Very quickly by Titan. Oh my god, NiKo gets 3, 4! Oh my lungs, I don't believe it! Shox then has just to find one more. The molly isn't gonna touch him. And what on earth has just happened? His deagle is on fire and Shox is gonna walk into it as well. NiKo is on fire.
At Cluj-Napoca, he almost dragged Mouse kicking and screaming to a win over G2, and we had the first glimpses of NiKo's incredible potential. If you still weren't convinced, we can talk about him picking up a 1.51, yes that's a 1, a 5 and another 1, rating while his team went out in the quarterfinals at IEM Katowice 2016. Just the 42 kills that are lost to Fnatic that sent them out. Another deagle ace a year later on the same map helped push Mouse to quarterfinals at E-League after they'd finished second at ECS, and it really outlined how much NiKo had improved them. But also, it outlined that NiKo probably deserved a little bit more. Mouse had swapped some players around, with Oscar replacing Chris J and Nex departing. It wasn't enough to convince NiKo that he could win things with Mouse. And this time there was the fat-walleted cats at FaZe Clan who had set their eyes on NiKo. FaZe flew out of the blocks with 3 big grand finals in the first few months, but losses to Astralis, SK and SK again were a little disheartening. It felt like a matter of time, but it's possible NiKo had had some dodgy dealings with a monkey in his paw. Those fears would be somewhat allayed, at least for now, as FaZe Clan won E-League and ripped through ESL 1 New York with nary a glove laid on them. NiKo's lowest rating in a map at this event was 1.37, and he went 16-6 in that game. He was on top of the world, FaZe Clan were on top of the world, and nothing could stop them. Every legendary figure has to overcome hardship. NiKo's cross to bear was that no matter how good he was, FaZe just lost finals, inexplicably too. Their dominance up to the grand final was only matched by their Spurs-esque commitment to fucking it up. NIP somehow found their way to the grand final in Oakland, and against all odds toppled FaZe in a best of 5. SK nailed them at Pro League, and famously there was the whole E-League major incident. A win at ECS and a win at IEM Sydney were nice, but to make this really stick they had to win more. And it was on the stage that NiKo was crowned king a few weeks ago that Flusher rolled back the years to break his heart in 2018. This one maybe stung more than the major. This wasn't just coincidence anymore. Flusher stood tallest when the chips were down and FaZe were nowhere to be seen. Chokes happened, but this became a monkey on their back. NiKo himself never dipped below world-class form this whole time, except occasionally in the grand finals. He was a monster, but it just didn't seem to matter. FaZe won in Belo Horizonte and took Epicenter, but a lackluster playoff showing at the Faceit Major and a string of playoff exits looked to mark the end of what could and perhaps should have been the FaZe era. 2019 was rough for FaZe and by extension NiKo, who had taken a less talismanic role and more of a leadership role, and his numbers had started to suffer. He was still scary, but he just wasn't putting up the 1.2s he was used to. A 0.8 rating in New York saw FaZe lose 4 maps without answer. NiKo's reputation as a player was dwindling, and his reputation as a difficult teammate was growing. It wasn't entirely without merit. Carrigan had been usurped by the Bosnian in what many saw as a coup d'etat, with seemingly no benefit. mousesports had replaced him and improved, leading some to think that as good as he was, he just wasn't worth it. 2019 was a turbulent year in terms of changes, form dips and results. FaZe were no longer real contenders. NiKo even finished 11th in the HLTV top 20 instead of his customary top 10 or sometimes top 5. We all know what happened in 2020, even if it seems like a bizarre fever dream in retrospect. The online environment gave FaZe a chance to reinvent themselves, and when they won IEM New York, it looked like maybe they'd figured it all out. They hadn't, of course. All hope was not lost for our protagonist, however. As the ship sank, NiKo grabbed a lifeboat and joined G2, an org who appeared to be cursed to not win anything, signing the guy who seemed cursed to lose finals. Great thinking, lads. But LAN play was coming back and NiKo was hungry again. Relieved from the stresses of in-game leading and the resulting pressure from the community, NiKo was in God mode. He popped off in Cologne, but G2 weren't quite ready to win just yet. It was the same enemy, Na'Vi, who bested them in the major final in Stockholm too. G2 were brewing something, but NiKo just still couldn't win finals. In his defense, he was the biggest reason G2 were ever in one, and Na'Vi looked unstoppable. G2 were close to greatness, and in Monacy they had found a prodigy AWPer to join the twin rifle Fangs that G2 already had. With Alexi B joining, the time for excuses was over. Monacy was sensational in his first tournament, and G2 made it to the Spodek and through semis to meet FaZe. FaZe Clan at this point were the best team in the world, there was not really any doubt, but Monacy's addition had given G2 a fresh look. If anyone could stop FaZe, it was G2. Similarly though, if anyone could stop G2, it was also G2. A massive lead was thrown on Inferno and G2 never recovered and got 3-0'd. If you want more on that game, you know what to do. It felt like it might never happen for G2, and for NiKo especially. 2022 wasn't shaping up in the best way either. Antwerp came and went with G2 nowhere to be seen in the deeper stages. Dallas was okay, but it was followed by a weak performance at Cologne. It looked like NiKo's peak was petering out without the trophies he'd deserve. But G2 had an ace up their sleeve. Alexi B had been swapped out for Hooksy and JKS came in, and immediately G2 looked fired up and ready to do something. That something wasn't qualifying for Rio though. It was a real low point, but G2 learned. They locked themselves away, they toiled, they grinded their asses off, and right at the end of 2022, they broke the curse. G2 had gone 5 years without a big trophy, but the team who came out in Abu Dhabi was unrecognisable from what we'd seen in the last ever. NiKo finally had a team. Every other time he'd won, it seemed to be off his own work, but it was Monacy who ended up with the MVP. G2 had it figured out, and usually that preceded a spectacular fall, but this time it felt different. Welcome to where our story ends, at least for now. The Spodek Arena. Just 1 year ago, this was the birthplace of Monacy's first tournament and NiKo's umpteenth Heartbreak. It's poetic in that sense that this is where G2 finally exercised their final demons. NiKo, holding back tears, finally lifting a massive trophy. We could build up more hype, sure, but there was no doubt about who the best team in the world was. They won 21 maps in a row, from Blast through to the Katowice Grand Final, only dropping Inferno in the Grand Final. Big, FaZe, Na'Vi, Liquid couldn't take a map, and Heroic scraped one. NiKo had finally done what he'd threatened to do with FaZe, dominated, start to finish, 2 events in a row. If this was the end of NiKo's career, it'd be a glorious end. Alas, it's just the start. G2's reign is beginning and the king has finally taken the throne. NiKo's been an incredible player throughout the years and now it seems he's finally ready to rule with an iron fist. Or maybe we've just jinxed him all over again. To one of the greats.